Welcome to Heartbreaking Talks channel. But before we start, I would really appreciate it if you could subscribe to the channel, like the video if you enjoyed it, and maybe leave a comment down below. That would help the channel a lot. Thank you very much in advance. The first one is titled, "My wife of 7 years thinks she might be into women and has been talking to someone behind my back." Bit of a long story here, but here goes. I met my wife online about 10 years ago and we hit it off immediately. There was lots of chemistry and we had a string of coincidental overlaps in our lives and things moved along quickly. I moved out of my place into hers about half a year later and then she into mine a year after that. 3 years into the relationship, I asked her to marry me and she said yes. That was 7 years ago. We bought a house and moved to the burbs and tried to start a family, but had no luck. We chalked it up to age, but have continued to try for about 3 years now. Our relationship had some bumps. Her dad is super handy and I'm not, and she felt I neglected my duties around the house with cleaning and fixing things up. She's mostly right. I am not proactive about chores and she has been vocal about me needing to pull my weight and be more romantic. I'm very cerebral and analytical and mostly lacking in the pathos department. Our sex life had started to atrophy about the time we started trying to conceive. An act of joy and love suddenly became more of an obligation in my mind and we both got maybe a little too comfortable in the relationship and started to gain weight fart in front of each other, all the normal things you start to learn to live within a long-term relationship. But I was still very attracted to her and she says she's attracted to me as well. However, she was looking for flowers and candles and loving whispers and I wasn't offering her those things. So, we are both aware of the problems we were facing even before this most recent bump. Last night, she told me that on a recent trip, she met a woman and they hung out for quite a while. This woman tried to kiss her and she resisted the advance. But she told me that she had strong feelings for this woman and wanted to kiss her and is now questioning her sexuality and may have always been a lesbian and only now realizing it. Obviously, there's a lot to process after 10 years together. I do still love her and I am very grateful that she felt comfortable enough to be honest with me about it. I told her that I was 100% supportive of whatever she is feeling and that her happiness is my main concern. That's true. I would never want to deny someone being who they felt they were and I understand that sexuality is complex and can change, even after 10 or more years. I'm not looking to deny her of her true feelings. Shortly after I asked if she had any contact with this woman since that night and she said she had. They have texted and talked on the phone. I asked if she would be comfortable with me reading these texts and she said she had deleted them. Hearing that, I told her that I was not comfortable with her staying in contact with this person. My feeling is that I fully support her sexuality in whatever form, but our marriage is an agreement of loyalty and trust and I felt this breached that bond. If she indeed needs time to work out her sexuality, then I will be there for her, but I think we should work it out together and not with an interloper involved. Her talking to this other person feels like a betrayal, but I'm curious to see what a counselor will say. We are going to relationship counseling as soon as she gets back from her most recent work trip. We have been talking constantly, though I feel mostly hurt and so I have not much to offer until she figures this out. Thanks for listening. Update. My 40M wife, 41F, of 7 years just left me for another woman. First, a quick summary of the update. My wife admitted to feelings for another woman she met out of town and continued communicating with her at that time. The day she left for her work trip, I felt the first waves of paranoia, jealousy, etc. And when we talked that night, I asked her to make sure she understood how important it was for the sake of our marriage and my well-being to not break her promise to not communicate with this other person. I asked for us to get through the counseling before she resumed contact. She said she knew and that she would not. 2 days later, she returned and was home when I got back from work. After we ate dinner, we started to discuss our future. Soon into that conversation, several truths were revealed. The contact between them had been nearly constant since the Vegas encounter. There was more than a feeling, there was making out and kissing. The contact was still happening. This last truth was the thing that will now lead to our divorce. The infidelity is bad, maybe unforgivable in and of itself, but the violation of trust and the manner in which my wife of 7 years has disregarded my feelings is the most painful part. She has been saying, I didn't have a choice and in terms of her sexuality, that may be true. But the choice to act on those feelings was hers. She was not interested in an open relationship or a threesome. I asked more out of curiosity than anything, and I also did not want these arrangements. In learning more about the relationship, I found out that there is a large age difference. She is 28 years old and there is already talk about living together, having kids through IVF, and even whether I would donate for the IVF. The thing I was not prepared for was when 15 minutes later, she was on her phone booking a one-way flight out of town to go see the person. The next day, I'm still in a bit of shock over how cold and insensitive that was. The next morning, she left to be with this woman. It has been several days since she has been gone. We have talked, though mostly about what is happening with regards to our marriage and general plans about selling our house. For a few days, she refused to seek counseling, but last night she promised to move forward with it. It's hard to trust that it will happen when so many promises have been broken lately. My wife is a lesbian, and I'm fine with that. It hurts to lose her and to be abandoned by the person you thought you would spend the rest of your life with. On the other hand, I care for her deeply, and I want her to live the life she thinks she wants and deserves. I am a straight man, and I cannot be married to a lesbian, so I see no hope for our relationship to succeed except as friends. The problem is I only want friends that are loyal. The next one story is titled, "My Scout Leader Did Awful Things to and With Me." How do I tell my wife about this? So, 20 years ago, my old Scout leader did bad things when I was 13. Nothing too horrific, but definitely wrong. Naked massages and getting me to drink alcohol, looking at adult videos and touching myself in front of him, in sleeping bags. Basically everything but full-blown assault. I'd forgotten about this, well, not forgotten, but it wasn't at the front of my mind for many years until recently, when every celebrity's transgression has been shouted from every media outlet. I've decided to do something about this. I know that there is no statute of limitations for this sort of crime where I live, but when it's my word against his, I don't know what chance the police will have of doing anything about it. Earlier today, I reported this to the National Scouting Body, and they will progress from here. All I want is for other children to not be put at risk. I'm quite resilient and suffered no ill effects, but I have no way of knowing what might have been, how it affected my personality, and most of all, how it will affect others. I just want him to not do this to anyone else. In my adult life, I support my wife who has multiple medical conditions from a car crash and has suffered other trauma in the past. I am her rock, and she relies on me so much for emotional and physical support. I know that if I open up to her about this, she will be devastated for me. It will almost certainly rekindle some of her trauma that she has moved past, and this will adversely impact our relationship. I have a few close friends, but I don't want to bring this into their knowledge. I think I can cope on my own just fine, but I can foresee needing to travel to give statements, and I'm sure there will be other tells, private phone calls, etc. I know that it would be healthy for me to discuss this with my wife, but I don't foresee any way to do so without adversely impacting her well-being, and that's not something that I'm willing to do. I don't want to keep secrets, so what can I tell her? Update to the Scout Leader story. I'm stubborn, so I haven't sought out therapy. But my hand was forced when my wife asked me a question about a phone call that I received from the police. I made a quick decision and opted to keep the full truth to myself, letting her know about the situation, but swapping my place for a friend, stating I was only a witness. This technique worked, and I didn't burden her with my concerns. That was the key worry of mine. Therapy would have told me to share the burden, but I couldn't do that for her sake. I think I made the right decision. Life has been very difficult for completely unrelated reasons over the last 18 months, and she is seeking therapy for that. For my sake, I'm not sure. Perhaps I could have alleviated some of the mental load by talking to others. When my mind is empty in the gym or doing some work in the garden, I often find that it drifts back to this whole situation. But I suppose only time will tell how this all settles, particularly after today's update. So it's been 2 years. Changes at the Scouting Association's protective team and with the police caused numerous delays, and the distance between where the offenses were committed and where both he and I now live meant that the investigation was extremely protracted. I didn't mind too much, as during this period he was barred from working with children, so I waited it out. The police eventually traveled to arrest and interview him. I'm told that he initially denied everything, but then admitted that we were at least in the same place at the same time. I'm guessing that was when faced with the testimony from the corroborative witness. I was also told that his testimony was viewed to be untrustworthy by the officers who interviewed him, but with the lack of any evidence, there's no way that my accusation would stand up in court. However, he has been barred from scouting for life, and his police record has been updated with this information permanently, which will appear if he ever tries to get any other job or volunteer post working with children. So, how do I feel? I entered into this process with a single concern that others may have been hurt during my period of inaction or would be hurt in future if I didn't speak up. I can't do anything about the former, and there will always be that nagging doubt in my mind. However, his chances of harming anyone else in future are significantly reduced, and he will now know that if he is caught in any similar offense in future, my testimony will then hold weight. My advice to anyone reading this in a similar situation: talk to whoever you feel may listen. You might not be able to tell your family or friends the full picture, but you may be able to get support when you most need it. The next one is titled "Wife and Her Family Don't Understand My PTSD." My wife and I have been together for 14 years and we have 2 daughters. In our dating phase, we probably should have split. I was a closed book and didn't give the attention and affection she needed. But the way she treated me then was rough, not going to lie. She slept with a former good friend of mine right before we got married, and this relationship for 2 years after we got married compared him to me even in terms of intimacy, unfavorably. Right after I found out about their affair and got in sty from it, she mocked me as a father and a husband for a year after, while I begged her to go to counseling with me and said I deserved it all for how I treated her like I was invisible. And she said I was lucky she didn't abandon me and take our first daughter, she's my biological child, away from me. I deserved that treatment. I got it then and I get it now. I worked too much, played too much when I was at home, instead of taking care of the house, and didn't care for my wife's emotional and romantic needs well at all. I understood thankfully a few years later. Right after our second girl was born, we got ourselves into therapy, individual and couples counseling, and we are now much stronger. The main problem of this post lies within me and her family. Lately, I have had some unfortunate side effects from the prior years. My individual counseling has been a big help, but I have had tics. For example, when someone tries to touch me, I shudder suddenly, and if I don't see them, I may react by shouting at them. I have compulsive issues when it comes to my family. I always make sure my wife and daughters are well fed and happy before they leave anywhere without me, for instance. Also, I can't stop weeping out of nowhere when I'm alone, like my mind goes to that dark place of myself being a failure. I have bad sleep cycles, like waking up in a sweat when I'm deep asleep in the middle of the night and sleeping more in the morning when I'm supposed to work. It then comes to the wife's parents and sister being around a lot more, being grandparents and aunt to her daughters and helping them grow strong, as my father-in-law says. One day, her sister saw me crying alone and told my wife what happened. My wife came into the room and yelled at me, and I just sat there listening to her complain that I was supposed to be over or past already. Her parents overheard everything and said that I wasn't fit to be raising our kids like this. I repeatedly tell them for months I'm in therapy and getting treatment, and they push me harder and stay worried for our kids. They all came over once for dinner and continued to push me when I was triggering. I snapped and told them to shut up. I couldn't take their reactions to my triggers. I then said that I would get better if they just treated me like a human being. They looked at me like I was evil and left immediately. My wife has been sleeping in another room for weeks now, and her family won't acknowledge me when they come over. Guys, all these stories are crazy. Now, I want to hear your feedback. Drop your thoughts in the comments. By the way, each comment helps us improve our channel, so don't hesitate to chat with us. We reply to everyone. And see you soon on Heartbreaking Talks.